Hi, this is Sanjay Sharma, and you are tuned to our very special conversation program called Sir, Let Me Tell You, where we invite students who are about to graduate or have recently graduated to impart and reflect on what they have learned and how they plan to apply in their lives, both personal as well as professional. This initiative stems from a startling realization. During a recent discussion with the students, I was pleasantly surprised to notice that they accumulated way more knowledge than I remember sharing during the class discussions. It was a real treat listening to them with their level of sophistication in articulating ideas, concepts, and theories. Frankly speaking, I felt so privileged witnessing their transformation as their teacher, mentor, or coach, and could not help but recall the Hindi verse. हर सुमन का सुरभि से यह अनलिखा अनुबंध पवन को सौंपे बिना यदि मैं झरूं सौगंध, meaning there is this unwritten contract between the flower and fragrance that the flower would not perish until it facilitates a smooth assimilation of fragrance with the wind so that it could achieve its purpose of existence or what it was meant to. For a teacher, nothing could be more delightful and rewarding than seeing motivated and diligent students come up with flying colors and excel in their fields of interest. All they need is a mentor who could assist them in figuring out a sense of direction and purpose of learning for their flourishing. This initiative is an effort to offer a platform where they can showcase their caliber and competence with confidence. Having taught in different parts of the world in different departments, I would be inviting students from political philosophy to international relations, Korean studies to Asian business management, legal studies to languages, and so on. If this is what resonates with you and you feel motivated to join us as guest students, let me hear from you. I hope you would love the program. Let's get started.
Today, my guest student is Mahima Khalkho. She's a political science honors undergrad student whom I have taught courses in first year, courses like political philosophy, a rather reticent student while having question answer sessions in the class, but I always know that, when nobody responds in the class, then she's the one, to ask for. So I'm always very positive, and today happy that she's joining us today, and curious what she's going to share with us. So welcome, Mahima, to the show.
Thank you so much, sir, and really humbled by your words.
You are you're finishing your first year basically, and you must be reading a lot of things. I would just like to ask a very plain question. Out of all these things that you have studied, or what is that one theme, one topic, one area, one book that you're very much interested, you would like to share with people? What would that be?
So, sir, since the beginning we have been talking about the state, and if I would tell about one of the statements of Gardner, so he says that political science begins and ends with the state. So state is something that fascinates me a lot, and when we read this political theory and political philosophy, in all these things, the one thing that I always loved and I always adored was about the origin of the state. So whether it was about the divine origin theory or about the social contract theory or the evolutionary theory, all these topics have fascinated me a lot. But personally, I would say I would love to talk about the social contract theory.
Okay, that's I think I like that topic too, and I don't know how many people without political science or law background would know about it. So I think it's going to be really fascinating. If he asks you, should every responsible citizen or every citizen be concerned about this social context, or it's okay not to know it?
Okay, so for this question, I would say that why should I worry about the social contract, or why should you worry about the social contract, or why should anybody else worry about the social contract? And the answer to this question would be because we are human beings, and that is the very reason that we should worry about it. It is not something to be merely studied in political science or to be known by the students of political science, but I believe it is something that every human being should know. And why should they know about it? Because we live in a society and we get influenced by the politics, we get influenced by our community, and no matter how much we try to say that we don't have anything to do with anyone, but still in our everyday lives we see that how much we are connected to people around us. And I believe it is something that should be known to everyone, and something that people should know, that we are living in a state, and why are we living in a state, and what is the purpose of the state, and what are my roles and responsibilities. So that is something that is important, and that is why this social contract is to be studied by anyone.
Okay, I see. So, I mean, what you're saying, like we are social creatures, and we are connected with each other. We are transacting, we are interacting, so we must know it. So, give me a brief, like, understanding or background of what is this context. Who are the party that the context is for, and what does it entail? What does it include?
So in order to understand the social contract theory, we need to understand that since this contains two words, social and contract. So when we talk about social, it is something related to society. And when we talk about contract, that means it's an agreement. So when we combine both these words, we come to understand that it is an agreement of all men among themselves to set up a civil society or a state. So when we talk about the social contract theory, we need to understand that the state came into existence, but we also need to understand what was the scenario when the state was not there. What was the state of people? What was the human nature? And how did they behave with each other when there was no state? So that is referred to as the state of nature, where we understand that how humans behave before the formation of a state. And then we also need to understand the terms of the contract. Then we also need to understand if we have set a state, we have set a government, and then we need to understand what is the nature of the sovereignty, and how people have the right to resist or not. So in order to understand all these things, there were three main exponents of this social contract theory. So the first one was Thomas Hobbes of England, and the other one was John Locke of England again, and then we talk about Jean-Jacques Rousseau of France. So these three are considered as the main exponents of the social contract theory, and all three of them have tried to explain the origin of the state, and they have given their different versions of the state of nature, and the terms of the contract, and also about the nature of sovereignty. So I believe we should look at how they have defined the state of nature and all these things one by one.
I see. So, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that actually these are the three main, it's a trinity, yeah, that has given this concept of social contract. I'm wondering, was there anything else before the social contract came into being, or we start from here?
Okay, before the social contract theory, there was the prevalence of the divine origin theory of the state. So what is this divine origin theory? This divine origin theory tried to explain the formation of the state as an act of God. It stated that the state came into existence because it was set up by God, and this was used to justify the authority of the king or anybody who was in power, because he stated that God has established that particular person in that place, and only God can replace that authority, and people did not have any right to question his authority, or people did not have any right to resist. So this theory was prevalent before the social contract.
I see. So, who, in this case, it was a divine theory. So, who was actually the person in charge of that state?
It was the king who was in charge of the state, and it stated that the king has been appointed by God, and only God has the right to remove that person, and his authority was absolute.
Oh, I see. And then, again, I mean, I'm just curious. So, if this was already the contract, why was there a need for a social, I mean, why was this transition needed, or, how did it happen?
So, this theory theory of the social contract came around in the 17th or in the 18th century. And what this theory tried to explain and how is it different from the divine origin theory is because this theory states that the state is not a creation of God. It tries to say that it is because of the mutual agreement of men, and it is because of the act of men and consent of men that the state comes into existence. It is not something natural, but it is something artificial that has been created by people.
Let's just think about all these three people that you talked about, Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau. What were their ideas behind this, and how different they were from one another?
The three exponents, the three chief exponents of the social contract theory, that is Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, and all three of them differed from each other in many of the aspects. So when we talk about the state of nature as described by Hobbes, we see that when we read about Hobbes, we need to be gloomy because that is the way he has described the state of nature. He says that it is a gloomy state. He says that in that state of nature, man is selfish by nature, and he says that it is a state in which there is a war of everyone against everyone. So if I could tell in his own words, he says that the life of men at this stage is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So these were the exact words that he used to describe the state of nature. So what we can make out from Hobbes' view of the state of nature is that he has described it as a state of total insecurity, anarchy, and it was a state where the situation was very chaotic and people just wanted to preserve their lives and they wanted to preserve their right to life. So that was the very reason that they decided to come into a contract so that their life could be protected. But when we talk about Locke's view of the state of nature, it is very different from that of Hobbes. It is not gloomy, and now we have to be happy because that is how he has described the state of nature. He says that his state of nature is not a state of constant warfare as we saw it in the case of Hobbes. He says that his state of nature is a state of peace, goodwill, mutual assistance, and preservation. So for him, man is a rational being, and he says that only when he sets aside the morality in himself and when he goes against something and he becomes an offender, so there's no authority to punish such a person or such an individual. So for this very reason, they decide to abandon the state of nature, and for this reason, they decide to set up a civil society. And when we see Rousseau's view of the state of nature, so it is also different from that of Hobbes or Locke, because Rousseau described men as a noble savage. He did not describe him as moral or immoral, but he described him as amoral. So he says that man lived a life of simplicity, and he lived a life of idyllic blissfulness. And for him, the men in the state of nature, they were self-sufficient, they were contented, and they were all, they were living their own lives. So, but then he says when there was a rise of civilization and when there was the development of arts and sciences, so private property, when this came into existence, so it led to many of the inequalities and the conflicts among the people. And for this very reason, they decided to abandon the state of nature and enter into the social contract. So these were the three different pictures of the state of nature as described by Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau.
When I think of Hobbes, the book that comes to my mind, or one treatise come to my mind, is this something called Leviathan.
Yes, sir.
Can you explain what it is?
So yes, Hobbes has written a book that is Leviathan, and in his famous work he tried to justify the absolute power of the sovereign. So when we go into its literal meaning, it is something like Leviathan is a sea monster. So in that he tries to justify that why should people give all the natural rights to the sovereign, and why should the sovereign be above all, and why should he have supreme power? So in order to understand the Leviathan, we also need to understand the context in which Thomas Hobbes lived. So he lived at a time when there was English Civil War of 1642, and he saw all those forces of disintegration, and he saw that how there was a chaotic situation, and the dispute and the fight between the royalists and the parliamentarians, all those things led to a lot of bloodshed. And one of the statement by Hobbes also states that he says that fear and I were born twins. So by this very statement, we can make out that how he lived his life. His life was a life of total insecurity, and he lived in a state of fearfulness. So when we see that he wants to give absolute power to the sovereign, so in his Leviathan he mentions it, because he says that if people would begin to revolt against the sovereign, or if people would begin to fight against the established authority, then they would again go back to the state of nature. And he did not want all those things to happen. He did not want people to again be in war with each other, and that is the very reason that he justifies that people should not revolt against him only unless he tries to directly threaten to kill them. So in that book, he has justified the authority of the sovereign.
So the only possibility he gives is that, if there is a direct threat to your life, only then you can, revolt or be against the government.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and what does Locke say about it?
Okay, so when we talk about the social contract by Locke, so indeed we have also observed in his state of nature that was very different from that of Hobbes. And when we talk about the social contract of Locke, we see that he gives importance to three natural rights, that is the right to life, liberty, and property. So what he wants is that the government should protect the three natural rights, that is the right to life, liberty, and property. And he does not give absolute power to the sovereign. He says that even if the terms of the contract are not being fulfilled by the sovereign, so people have this right to revolt against the government. People have this right to go against the government, because the government is created to provide them this sense of security, to preserve their three natural rights. And if the government fails to do so, then Locke says that yes, the people have a right to revolt against the government.
So he considered three things important. These are natural rights. So, life, liberty, and what was the third one?
The third one is property.
Property. Okay. So for Hobbes, it's only the life, and Locke adds two more.
Yes.
What about Rousseau in this context?
So when we study about Rousseau's social contract, we understand that what he wants to give is what is important to know in his social contract is the general will that is important, because in his social contract the sovereignty resides in the general will of all. So when we talk about the general will, we understand that it is a common will of all the members of the community for the welfare of all. So he says that people, when they come together, they surrender their natural liberty and to their collective whole. So when we see it in another sense, we see that whatever they lose as an individual, they gain it again as a corporate body, they gain it again as a community. So here we see that he talks about popular sovereignty. So he says that it is because of the will of all, and it is the will of the common body. So it is for the common good of all, and it is for the betterment of the society. So I think in his social contract he says that there would, since it is the general will of all, since it is the popular sovereignty, so there would never be a situation only that would lead them to resist against the sovereign.
So the general will comes from selective ones, or as like of all, they're representing everybody?
So general will is the will of the corporate body, and it stands for the community, and it is the will of all. So in order to understand the general will, there were some of the philosophers who tried to actually differentiate between two kinds of will, the actual will and the real will. So when they talk about the actual will, they say that it is the will of the lower self of an individual, and when we talk about the real will, so that is the will of the higher self of an individual. So when we talk about the general will, and when we try to understand the general will, it is like a synthesis of all the real will, that is the higher self of an individual. And when all of them decide to surrender their wills to the community, so that would be for the betterment of all.
If I'm not mistaken, is Hobbes supporting a kind of like absolute monarchy or dictatorship or some other form of the government?
Is Hobbes.
Hobbes, yeah.
Okay, so Hobbes, when we read him, so we get to understand that he is supporting absolutism, and as we have seen that there is no space for resistance in a state, so we understand that he is supporting monarchy in his case.
And what about Locke as far as the form of the government is concerned?
When we try and evaluate Locke, we come to understand that since he has not given absolute power to the sovereign, so we can say that he tries to establish constitutional government. So constitutional democracy, I would say.
And is it same for Rousseau?
In case of Rousseau, we can say that he talks about popular sovereignty. So there is something like direct democracy which he supports.
I don't know, some long ago I vaguely remember that probably he was also in favor of aristocracy or so. I don't know if you can,
Yes, he was indeed in favor of aristocracy as well, because since he has tried to, since when we talk about his general will, we come to understand that it is the will for the good of all and their corporate capacity, and we can understand by it that he also, when we try to understand the form of government, we can say that yes, he supports aristocracy as well, because that would also be representing the general will of all. In Rousseau's case, he says that it is because of the population that he tries to state that democracy may not go well for some states, and for this very reason he states that aristocracy may go well for the other.
if you look at the world around us, people are seemingly not very happy with democracy. Based on whatever you have learned in social contract and the thoughts of these three people, how do you interpret the way world is changing or this transition phase that we are seeing all over the world?
Uh, so in today's time, we see, and when we look around us, so there are a number of reasons that we may not be satisfied with the government, since we also have a democratic government in our country, and when we look around the world as well, we see that people are not satisfied with their government, and when we read about the social contract theory, and when we try to draw parallels with today's time and with the social contract theory, we understand that many are times when even when we read about Plato, I think when we read about Plato, he also doesn't support democracy, and so today's arena in which people, when they don't support democracy, it is something that means we need to understand it from both perspectives. Like when we talk about the social contract and when we understand it, so we need to understand that the social contract clearly lays out the roles of the government, the roles of the sovereign, and the roles and responsibilities of the people as well. So when we don't focus on our responsibilities, our roles, and our duties, at the same time, when we cannot just blame the government, but we also need to understand our roles and responsibilities. And when Locke says that when we choose someone as a sovereign, so we don't have to sit back. He says that we have to be like a watch guard. We have to watch whether the terms of the contract are being fulfilled or not. And if not, then he gives us the right to resistance. So that is where sometimes we lack. Sometimes we don't become vigilant enough to question. Sometimes we don't become vigilant enough to question what about our texts, to question about the policies, to question about the happenings. So that is why this has led to increased inconveniences, especially in democratic nations.
Do you remember that you ever signed a social contract since you were born?
This is a very interesting question, and we may think that I have not signed any kind of contract with anyone, but I would say that since we are born, we have signed a number of contracts, and till date we are signing a number of contracts. So I would say that even when we were not in our senses, when we were we did not understand the things around us, but when we were born, so we signed a contract, and the contract was our birth certificate that we got from the hospital. And when we entered the school, and before that also, we have got our certificate of citizenship of this country. We have got our certificate of citizenship of a particular state. And when we enter any of the institutions, like when we enter schools, at that time also we sign a contract. When we enter university, at that time also we sign a contract. So I believe in our everyday life, whether it is visible to us or not, but we every day we sign a contract, and we sometimes become unaware of all those things.
Say, for example, if you're given a choice,
Okay.
which social contract you would prefer? The Hobbes social contract, Locke, or Rousseau, and why?
Okay, so I would personally love, I adored all three of them, because there's something to take from all three of them. But if I have to choose any one, I would say I would like to pick up the social contract of John Locke. And the very reason for it is that, first of all, I would say that he talks about three natural rights: the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property. So when we talk about the right to life, it is something that goes without saying. That is necessary for an individual. And when we say the right to liberty also, we can say that it is the independence that we need. But when he says that he includes the right to property also as a natural right, so that was something that struck me when I read it for the first time. So it was something that I questioned, and I was curious about it, that why did he include the right to property also in the list of natural rights. So that is something which has fascinated me, and when I got to know the reason that he included the right to property also, so I found it very justifying, because he says that when an individual, he puts his labor, he puts his efforts, he puts his time and energy into something, and he builds something out of the nature through his efforts, through his labor, and that is something that becomes his property. So he has an ownership over that particular thing. So this becomes very true, because we can see in our daily lives also, we can see when we talk about any of the property, so it is not merely about the money, but it is more about our hard work, it is more about our time, because money may be given to us, but the amount of time that we spend on building that property, and the amount of hard work that we spend on building up a particular property, that cannot be returned. So I believe that that becomes a part of our life only. That the right to property becomes our life only. So that is the very reason that he includes the right to property also. So I personally like this explanation and justification so much. And then I also like the way in which he says that citizens need to be the watch guards. So he says that citizens have to be aware, and citizens have to look whether the sovereign is really fulfilling his duties or not. So if it is not according to the terms of the contract, then yes, they have the right to revolt, and they have the right to resistance. So that is also something that fascinates me, and I would really like to be in Locke's social contract.
How about Rousseau, or those, or at least those, three, how to say, the mottos of French Revolution? Do you remember those three words?
Yes, sir, and it was inspired by Rousseau.
Rousseau. It was inspired by Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Yes,
He says liberté, égalité, and fraternité.
Yes, sir.
So how about those elements? I mean, liberté has been covered, liberty in Locke. Huh?
Yes, sir.
What about other? Egality? Egality, is it important for you? Egalitarian system? Is it important to have a fraternity? Because we are living in a global world, a global village.
Okay, yes, sir. So as I already pointed out, that if we would go deeper into all the three of them, we can obviously pick up something that is to be applied in, I think I should create my own social contract then out of the three.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good point. Huh? So you have to have the amalgam of So you
Yes.
take three from Rousseau and three from Locke.
Yes, sir.
I'm wondering, would you also like to take Leviathan from Hobbes?
If I would take from Locke's view, then I would probably not pick it from Leviathan.
Yeah, that probably may not be a very good idea. I think we have come a long way after. I mean, it's not that distant from now that we used to have all these, princely states and monarchies and aristocracies in our country. When you look at the people around you, do you think people are aware of these kind of things, like that they are part of a social contract, or they are aware of their both duties as well as responsibilities, or do you think there is a very less or lesser understanding about it?
That is the very reason I believe that the social contract theory should not be just studied by the students of political science, but it should be known to every human being, because that is the very reason I see when I see and I interact with people, and I come to understand that they are in a contract, but they are not aware about it. They have the right to question, but they do not question. They are being treated unjustly, but they do not know what to do. So after reading and analyzing the social contract, I came to understand and I came to be aware about my rights, my responsibilities and my duties. So I think that this is how it has helped me. But when I see people, those who are not aware about any of the contract, they don't understand in what situations what should they do. They don't understand about when we go and like we can take a very simple example. When we go to the traffic signal and when we don't find any police officer or any traffic officer around us, so we find it very easy to skip it. So that is the very point where we don't understand our responsibilities, where we don't understand our duties. And secondly, we can say that when we are paying our taxes, when we are fulfilling our duties as an individual, then at the same time we have this right to question also, and we have this right to question where is my money being utilized and why is the road outside my home not being constructed. So these all things are something which people miss out at times. They don't understand what are my responsibilities. At the same time, they don't understand how should I react and how should I behave when I'm not being, when the state is not taking care of my needs and my desires.
Does it have anything to do with the kind of like literacy in our country, or it's a kind type of education or the quality education that you would like to connect this issue with?
Yes, that is something which I can throw light upon, because uh, this is something which is not all these things are like practical. So when we read about, we since our childhood we have read about the traffic signals or the road traffic rules, and we have read about the fundamental rights and duties. But when we come to this real world, when we see things around us, and when we see people being exploited or so, but we don't speak. So that is the very place where we can understand that if we stay quiet and if we stay we don't react, or if we stay neutral, then we can probably understand that the education and the kind of education that we are getting is of no use, because it would have been just about numbers and the marks. But if as an individual, and if I'm not if even I'm not literate about my rights and duties, but when I see injustice around my area, around my society, in my society, and I speak for it, so that is something which shows that uh, something which shows that people are more educated and aware about the thing. So the kind of awareness that we have, and the way we utilize our knowledge, the way we utilize our senses to help others, to lift others, and to build a society in harmony. If we do it without education, or if we do it with the so-called figures, I would say the so-called literate figures, so that does not define the kind of education in our country. But the use of our senses, the use of our awareness, and the way the courage that we put forward when we see things things around us happening wrong, and when we use our voices for the right things, I think that indicates the correct type of education, the correct type of awareness that students and then everybody needs in today's arena.
You're finishing your first year, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I'm quite amazed. Huh? Within this just first year of your undergrad program, you have learned and you have studied so much. I would like to know, after having studied whatever you have so far, including social context, how has this learning about the state or the society or politics, how has it changed your own life or thinking process?
So it has indeed changed my perspective towards many things in life, and this is something for which I can speak for hours and hours. But since we don't have that much time, so I would just put forward few of the things that how it has changed my understanding, and how it has changed my view of the thing. So even I say that after reading about the state, about its elements, and after reading how the people could have come into being and how the state would have been established, or after understanding about the concepts like equality, justice, and all those things. So all these things have overall helped me to become much better than what was I before. So when we I believe in every aspect of my life I could apply all these things, because when at a time I was, how I connected Locke's private property to my own life is that when once I saved up my money and I worked hard for it, and I bought something and it got broken or it got damaged. So I was like that somebody needs to give protection to my private property. So that is where I connected to him, and I was like that Locke was right at that time, and that is the very reason he placed private property, because our hard work is something that we want it to be preserved. So this is the smallest example of the things, and in our day-to-day lives, I see that this political science and these concepts of political science can be applied to the smallest of the things to the biggest of the things. So it helps us to understand that how necessary it is to know about our rights, to be vigilant about our rights, to be vigilant about our duties. When because if we are not aware about the problems, we would never be able to find the solution. So sometimes I feel that we should first of all understand that there is a problem in anything. Earlier we directly wanted to jump to solutions to the things. I personally wanted to jump to solutions to any of the problems in my life, but first of all, there's a need to recognize that what are the things and where is it wrong, and then only we can come to conclusions. Then only we can come to a state where we understand that how that problem can be solved. And this the study of political science has also helped me to develop a sense of understanding of people around me. How do people behave? How does the government behave? And we can talk about any of the thing only when we have read about it, or only when we are aware about how it happens. So society and politics is something which is inevitable for us to be avoided. So it is something which influences us in our day-to-day lives, and the study of political science therefore has helped me to be much better from what I was before.
Obviously, I mean, you see the merit of this kind of knowledge or learning. Suppose if I ask you that, now that you know it, because sometimes what happens, people don't understand, they don't appreciate, they have no idea what they need to know. But once you know it and you already have realized it, have you thought that you are going to actually share it or impart with some people? In what ways, if so? Do you have any idea that it should be shared with people?
Yes, it is indeed something that should be shared, because I think we should not keep anything to us, to ourselves. We should, if we have something within us, we should share it with them, and only with this sharing we can make people more aware. Like I said, that people are not aware about rights. That's the problem. But then if I am aware about it, then it is my responsibility to make that person aware as well. So it can be started with the little things, like I can whenever I see a problem in my family, I can share with them, and I can use these concepts of political science to share with them the probable things which can lead to a solution. Whenever I see my society into a problem, or whenever I see some problems in society, I believe that the where I can there I can stand and I can share my idea about how is this a problem and how should it be eradicated. So I believe that beginning with myself first of all, things need to be applied in my life, and then to my family, and then to the society as a whole. Then I can see that this knowledge would probably help people around me to grow.
I think this is absolutely possible, and this is the way to to do it, because there was a time when people were remote; they were living literally, physically far distant from each other. But with the advent of information technology and real-time interaction transactions, now we cannot consider ourselves as prosperous if our neighbors, if our society is not at least to some extent, prosperous. Some of the people that are listening to us at the moment who have no idea about the subjects or areas of political science, and if they're, curious about this topic now after listening to you, I'm sure they must be. What kind of books would you recommend or suggest that, they should go through or they should refer to understand, to have a better understanding of the subject or the topic?
Okay. So there are a number of sources which we can refer to when we are when we want to read about the social contract. So the books that were written by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau can be understood to some extent, but we can also refer to some online sources like I personally like to read this and prefer the site uh, plato.stanford.edu, and also some sites like Britannica. And apart from that, I have read from books like Western Political Thought by O.P. Gaba, and we can also learn and we can also read from their original works of of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau.
Wow, Mahima, I think the way you have explained. I have learned quite a few things, which I don't remember if we discussed that when we were having the class discussions. So it was great talking to you, and I don't want to actually cut it off at the moment, but because of the nature of this episode, we are already approaching the end of it. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Mahima Khalkho, and you have just heard her articulating some of the critical concepts in a super succinct manner. I'm sure that depending on her time, we would also invite her again to throw light on some other interesting, important, relevant topics in future. So I would like to thank you, Mahima, for your time and for letting us know all these things so nicely. Thank
Thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much, sir. It was a pleasure.
Likewise, and we look forward to having you again. Take very good care.